I'm just gonna, start up the open captions. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And thank you all for joining. And thank you to the team from EMEA on Rails for inviting me today. I'm so excited to tell you a little bit of the stories of mentorship that I've had and the things that I've learned along the way that I hope to share that I hope to can inspire you to try your hand at mentorship today. So a couple things before we get started. If you would like to follow my slides along, I've left a link at the bottom of this slide, ramonh.dev/mentorship stories.pdf. Go ahead and use that and you'll have a copy to follow along on your device if you prefer. So let's dive right into it. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself. I'm Ramon. My pronouns are he, him. I'm originally from Chile, but I'm living in Austria for a very long time, so I can't really say I'm Chilean anymore. I've been freelancing as a software developer for many, many years, mostly in Ruby and JavaScript, lately some Rust as well, which has been a lot of fun. And community has been a huge part of that for me. Being able to empower one another, being able to learn from one another has been a significant joy that I've gotten out of it, and has really been some of the best lessons I've learned in technology, in dealing in interacting with people and being a better human being. Excuse me. And I've been part of this wonderful community for the last couple of years called the Mozilla Tech Speakers Program, which is just one of my favorite experiences ever. And I've also been a coding coach for children in the past, which kind of plays into my story that I'm going to be telling you about today. Lately, I've joined the team at CodeC as a developer advocate, where my job has been to help empower folks in collaborating and understanding complex code bases. So I'm going to stick to me for just a tad longer, so please bear with me. I'm going to tell you the story of how my interaction with mentorship really began in my career. And to give you a little context for that, I was studying software engineering at the Technical University of Vienna, and I was ready to move out and live with my partner, and I had absolutely no experience. So I was looking for jobs in things related to caring for children or that sort of thing. And my partner found a post on one of these websites for jobs and that said freelance macOS developer, macOS X. Sorry, that's back when it was called OS X. macOS X developer is being looked for. Now, at the time, I had installed Xcode on my computer, which is the suite for developing macOS apps, but I didn't have really any practical experience. But through the encouragement of my partner, and I guess a rush of self-confidence, which is not terribly common for me, I applied and I said, hey, here's my CV. I would love to try out for this. And I got a response. I got a positive response where the person who was looking for a developer said, all right, tell you what, let's meet up next Monday. This was on a Friday. So I was like, oh my goodness. Okay. So we met at the Cafe Mozart, which I know is very Vienna, but it's there. So there we are. We're at the Cafe Mozart. Everything's going well. I'm there. I'm very nervous. And we had a very friendly introduction. And he said, so Ramon, I've taken a look at your CV and I had to ask you, why are you applying for this job? You don't have any practical experience. And this was an incredible luck on my side that I was able to somehow say something like, hey, look, I really like what you posted. I really like what I've been learning in software development. I had just purchased my first MacBook. So I was like, this was back in 2008. And I was, 2010. Gosh, time flies. And I was just super excited about, the platform and learning how to program. And he said, look, I'll tell you what, I can't hire you just yet, but here's a book. And he gave me the name of this book. It's called Cocoa Programming for Mac OS X by Aaron Hillegas from Big Nerd Ranch. And this book was kind of my first step into professional software development. And he said, look, read this book. I will then hire you to do a very small task, a very small bug fix for one of my apps. And then let's go from there. So he kind of took a chance on me. Along the way, he was also teaching me things like publishing apps. He was teaching me Ruby, the tooling that he wrote to be able to automatically generate these Mac app bundles was written in Ruby. So I was getting my experience with Ruby there. He was recommending me books. He was recommending me best practices and even code editors. He got me on Vim. And slowly I got more comfortable and we started a working relationship, which actually persists to this day. But for me, the most unforgettable day was about 3 weeks in, where he sent me an email with the subject, highly pleased with your work. And this was game changing for me because I felt I can do this. It was like a jolt in motivation. And many years later, as I've been doing things related to mentorship, I kind of realized that Philip here was, and in several ways still is, my mentor. And I'm extremely grateful for that. So this is going to be the part of the talk where we go into a definition of mentorship, which of course I grabbed from the internet. So I'm going to read it to you here. Mentorship is a relationship between two people where the individual with more experience, knowledge, and connections is able to pass along what they have learned to a more junior individual within a certain field, which is all well and good. There's a couple of things that this definition, because it's a definition, doesn't go into that I really want to expand upon today. One of them is that mentorship, big and small, the scale doesn't really matter. It's kind of happening everywhere. Be it, for example, I'm going to show you some examples. Be it on a pull request. Here's a pull request from 3 years ago that I made to the Rails Girls Summer of Code codebase. Rails Girls Summer of Code was a program for helping underrepresented folks get into open source software development that I helped organize for many years. More on that later. And what I loved about this is that I made my pull request, and as you can see at the bottom here, Klapradla commented, "This looks solid." I added some small comments here and there. I think it would be a good opportunity to clean up and remove some, and I couldn't screenshot all of it, but it was some constructive feedback. And this was, in several ways, a form of mentorship. Mentorship is not just, of course, online, but also in person. What you see here is a photo from a meetup. This, in particular, is the Vienna RB meetup, which is organized, of course, here in Vienna. I'm told I hope one of the organizers is here. One of the organizers is here as well. I cannot see. This photo is, this is from 2014, 2015. It's a long time ago. And here what we're doing at a meetup, like we are today, is sharing knowledge, sort of learning from one another, talking, giving feedback, constructing together. And actually, I'm in this photo too. You can see me with much shorter hair right there. Mentorship can happen in the form of workshops. This is a photo from a workshop in around the same time, 2014, 2015, from the Django Girls meetup, doing an introduction to Flask. For those of you who are more familiar with Ruby, Flask is kind of equivalent to Sinatra. So it's a lightweight web framework. And these are all kinds of workshops where folks can come in and act as those mentors to come in and help folks get either introduced or unstuck with several problems related to the content of a workshop. So in this context, we've got mentors come in and help out with learning Flask. There are, of course, equivalents for other programming languages. There's Rails Girls, Rails Bridge, Rust Bridge. These are all workshops for, at least in these examples, for encouraging underrepresented folks to get into these specific programming languages and frameworks. But mentorship doesn't happen only with adults. Mentorship happens with children. What you see here is a photo, with permission, of course, taken from an after-school activity that we used to run. You can see my spouse there. We were teaching. Where we would teach kids to program games. This was called computer game programming. We had a lot of fun doing so, and it was sort of a 1-hour weekly session where we would get together and learn to code. Mentorship happens over long periods of time. Mentorship happens over shorter periods of time. This photo brings me so much joy. This is a photo of the team from 2015 of Rails Girls Summer of Code, where I was one of the coaches. My job was to help the team of two learn to get unstuck with specific programming challenges, or even introduce them to specific coding concepts. Excuse me. Mentorship doesn't happen just over text or over in person. Mentorship happens over video chat as well. What you see here is also from Rails Girls Summer of Code, with different teams that I mentored over the years. Going clockwise, top left, we've got teams from all over the world. Going clockwise, from the top left, we've got Colombia, we've got India, and we've got Vienna. It's been an incredible journey, and some of the memories that I cherish the most are from Rails Girls Summer of Code. And of course, mentorship doesn't just happen with software engineering specifically, as coding as a practice specifically. It also happens with things related to tech, like speaking. What you see here is a photo from the 2020 edition of Global Diversity CFP Day, which is one of my favorite yearly events at the moment, wherein folks can come in and learn to pitch, give, prepare slides for programming talks. And it's one of my favorite things to do. And just some of my favorite people I've met here. So those are some of the different forms that mentorship can take. Next, to answer the question would be, so why be a mentor? And instead of answering that question myself, I'm going to let the mentorship guide, which I link here, written by Gedis Cardena, answer that much better than I can, because there are 3 groups of people that mentorship helps. It, of course, helps others. The person you're mentoring can help get a boost in their career, their education, maybe help them with combating imposter syndrome, helping them get unstuck in projects, or how to communicate effectively. But being a mentor also helps you. You learn more about yourself. You expand your worldview. You make a new friend, ally, or supporter. You feel good. You get this really positive feeling about giving back. You find knowledge gaps in your own thinking. I found that really taking the time to explain, to try and verbalize something that I'm, trying to get unstuck on, can really help me understand that concept a lot better. And of course, by trying to mentor somebody on something that might be less familiar to you, you can learn something new as well. But as a community, mentoring really helps us all to encourage each other to collaborate and to be inclusive, to be able to show others what it is like to be an effective, positive mentor. And we all sort of give each other a leg up. So I want to take a second to make a distinction between mentoring and teaching. Teaching, from my experience, this is purely opinion-based. From my experience in teaching, I think of school, where I think teaching goes in where the knowledge kind of transfers in one direction. The teacher teaches the students. The teacher would teach me French. Pas bien, not very well. Anyway, my French, that is. The teacher was great. Whereas mentoring, I like to think of being unidirectional, but many bidirectional. Yeah, going both ways. So the mentee, that is the person that's getting mentored, can also teach the mentor by asking questions, by having an open communication. So next, and I realize I've been going for a while, I want to offer some of the pieces of advice that I like to give myself when entering a new mentorship relationship. The first one would be to open with when I start a mentoring relationship with somebody, to really start at the beginning and let them lead. Ask them, What are your goals? What is it that you as a mentee hope to get out of this relationship? Right? Let them verbalize, help them verbalize. Maybe it helps them understand better what they need. What yeah, exactly, help them understand better what it is that they need by allowing them to verbalize that. And I think the other thing that's important to bear in mind with that is that over time this might change as they learn with you, as you learn from one another as time goes on. It's important, in my opinion, to make this a regular thing, to check in every few months, depending of course on the nature of this relationship, every certain amount of time, and say, hey, is this what does your goal look like? Has it changed? Has things changed? Do you have your priorities changed? Yeah, let's talk about habits. And I'm not going to talk about best practices per se in terms of technology, but in terms of how to be a community member. For example, a community member and a technologist. You'll see what I mean. um, One good habit to exhibit as a mentor is to show empathy for your mentee. The great thing about mentorship is that as a mentor, you're already exhibiting empathy by helping the other person learn, by guiding them, by putting yourself in their shoes, and by showing that you can help the other person develop that habit of empathy as well. Um, by being a mentor, you can also show your mentee how to be an effective communicator by showing them your problem solving, by showing them your communication skills, by showing them how you talk to others. You can incite good habits as to how to, for example, communicate when something isn't going as per the plan. For example, as a freelancer, when I'm behind schedule, to say, this is why I'm behind schedule. This is how much time I think I'll need. And to be okay with that. These things happen. Yeah. And by these sorts of habits that one picks up, I want to really emphasize they're not short term, they are long term, because by being a mentor, you're also teaching a mentee how to be a mentor. So, by instilling these good habits, you then pass them on not just to the person that you're mentoring, not just to your mentee, but to the mentee of that mentee, the the grand mentee in a way. Yeah, and these really go a long way towards helping the community grow. Asking challenging, narrowed questions, I think, is another really good habit to have that you can pass on to your mentee. When they ask you questions, maybe you can help them narrow those questions down. For example, one question that I get very often is something like, hey, Ramon, which programming language is the best language to learn if I want to work as a web developer? And of course, with experience, we realize that there's no really clear answer to that, because it depends not just on context but on time, you know. So maybe a better question would be something like, hey, which programming language should I learn first if I want to work as a web developer? Better yet, maybe not one which is best, but what's a good programming language to learn first if I want to work as a developer? And by narrowing down this question, it also helps the mentee sort of understand that there's a lot more going on than one would realize at first glance. So, on that notion of habits, let's talk about opinions. Everybody loves the myth. That's what people say, isn't it? That the myth that developers are opinionated. I want to encourage, I like to encourage myself when I'm mentoring someone to, instead of just saying this is the best practice, to show them why I like this, not impose it on them, but to expose them to it. And I was I was talking about this earlier. For example, when Philip was showing me why he liked Vim, that's why I liked Vim. Same goes for programming languages. When Philip showed me why he liked Ruby, I kind of went thinking like, yeah, I like Ruby a lot. And the same goes for things like coding styles or even technology. Some people prefer MacBooks, some people prefer Linux, and so on and so forth. Some people prefer a trackpad. I like a vertical mouse and a clicky clacky keyboard, you know. Um, I think 2020 has been a really good year for people to experiment with what they like to do with their screens and stuff. Yeah, for example, I've got one horizontal and one vertical, just trying it out by showing people different things, like, for example, that different software projects are going to have different Git history styles. Instead of saying this is it and this is the way it is, to say these are ways that it can be done, and this is why I like this methodology better, can help a mentee come to their own decision, but also, impart your wisdom. Speaking of wisdom, let's talk about being supportive, because oftentimes with mentor-mentee relationships, imposter syndrome is going to play a role. When it comes to software development, especially in my experience, I've always struggled with imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome, by the way, in case you're not familiar with the term, this notion that some people get when they've reached somewhere in their career or otherwise, where they kind of feel like a fraud and they're scared of being found out. Why have I been hired as a junior developer? I'm no good. I recently, having started doing developer advocacy, I kind of had a resurgence of that imposter syndrome. And to be able to empathize with your mentee and show them that maybe it doesn't go away. In my experience, imposter syndrome never really goes away. It just, you learn to handle it, or you either you deal with it in different ways depending on how it comes in. Depending on mood, depending on situation, mood, and all that. But I think it's important to also remember, when you're in a mentor-mentee relationship, that these perspectives are not the end all be all. These are the perspectives from your experience. As I was saying earlier, with in terms of, I think the same thing plays a role for perspective. So making it clear to your mentee, look, this is the way I experienced X, Y, or Z. These are the techniques that worked for me. These are the communication techniques that helped me get out of this, or come out better. This is the algorithm that I coded in order to in order to solve this problem. This is the solution that I went with. It's important to bear in mind that this comes from your experience, and to really drive that home to your mentee as well. And on that note of solution, same goes for feedback. Giving constructive feedback as a mentor is critical, because I'm sure we've all had situations in our career where we've either made a pull request or submitted a piece of work, where instead of being given the constructive feedback that we needed in order to improve that piece of work, we were instead given destructive. This is terrible. This is rubbish. PR closed. This is a waste of my time. And as a mentor, taking the time to explain to someone how something can be done better really helps encourage them, really gives them that jolt in motivation, as I alluded to earlier, to keep going, to work past these feedback. And it's not like that constructive feedback can't be difficult to work through. Sometimes getting that feedback can be very scary. I'm oftentimes to this day still scared of receiving feedback, just be kind of imposter syndrome, I suppose. One technique that I've picked up for giving constructive feedback is this concept of asking guided questions. That is, questions that kind of lead into a discussion where you encourage your mentee to think critically and think, okay, what instead of giving them the answer, you let them come to the answer themselves. So I'm going to show my 2 slides with code on them. One of my 2 slides with code on them. So here we have an ERB view in Rails. That what it does, it's a header that shows a localization for week, as well as the week number for the current week, for a given date range. So this is part of a pull request I was given by my mentee, and asked to please review it. And at a first glance, a couple of things that come out to me as a person who has some experience developing Rails for a while. I noticed, for example, there's string concatenation going on, which kind of is in my experience, a bit of a code smell. But instead of going straight at that, I instead sat down with my mentee and just asked these guided questions. For example, in this example with week numbers, I would say, what happens if we had a spoken language a locale for which the weak number is in the middle of a sentence instead of at the end, as you see here. So what we did with my mentee was we sat down, we went through the Rails guides, we looked at how the internationalization, the I18N gem, which is the Ruby term framework or library, for how that goes, how that works. And we came up with a solution together where we said, okay, we can have this locale and give it that we can then use inside the locale at our own discretion. So there's no more string concatenation. We just use this I think it's called a local variable in the context of that locale, which was phenomenal. And I did no coding myself. I didn't take over the keyboard. I let my mentee drive by asking these guided questions. The last part that, in my opinion, is important about being supportive is this notion of maximizing help, but at the same time, minimizing harm. Will Larson, who wrote this incredible blog post that I'll link at the end here, wrote this blog post called Mentoring from Privilege. And for me, as a white cis man, it's super important to, when I'm mentoring someone, to stand that privilege, to not give advice about things that I don't know about, right? For example, I myself don't have a very helpful perspective on breaking into the technology industry from another one, having studied software engineering at the TU, Technical University. And in these cases, to offer alternate venues for mentorship or learning possibilities when possible, of course, to ground my stories in the context of my privilege, as opposed to generalizing them and just saying something, oh, that's just the way things are. And as a mentor, to explicitly, as I learned from Kim Creighton recently, to gather my people, to call out behaviors or experiences that I understand to have hinged heavily upon in my privilege, and would be risky if performed with less of that, with less privilege, to really, as I said, minimize that harm. Let's move on to another tip, which is to be attentive. Of course, when it comes to mentorship, the mentor will do a lot of the talking, but so will the mentee, as I've been getting at. And I think it's incredibly important. I like to think of myself when I'm mentoring to kind of think of myself as a on-demand rubber duck. If you're not familiar with it, rubber ducky programming is this concept where you take a rubber duck. I don't have a rubber ducky. I've got this little penguin dog that I will often talk to, where I explained to whom I explain my programming challenges and hope by verbalizing them, I can understand them better. And I think it's super important, even though, for example, if I'm in a situation where with my mentee, where they're showing me a solution, which I think is completely incorrect or wrong, even if I 100% disagree with them, I think it's super critical to let them voice out this full explanation patiently, understanding where they're coming from. It's again this thing of empathy and going at it so that you can say, great, and then asking those guided questions once again to get to a solution that is maybe by hearing them out, you might realize that as a mentor, they have a better idea of how to implement or solve a problem than I would going in. So on that note of listening and picking up on issues, I think it's super important to go into mentorship with a mentality of we're going to learn together. As I was saying before on my slide with minimizing harm, I think it's important to avoid giving advice on topics that I'm not familiar with. So even though it's a little bit scary, like when doing Q&A at a conference and you're like, oh my gosh, what if they ask me a question that I don't know the answer to? One of my favorite things to do in a mentorship relationship is when somebody asks me a question that I don't know the answer to just straight away go, you know what? I don't know. Let's find out. And actually, one of my favorite stories that I've ever had in my career, I got from teaching kids to code. So I'm going to show you an example of that. So what you see here is a very well drawn, I'm sorry, I'm not very good at drawing, window of a game that I've been programming with the kids. And what we've been doing is learning to draw graphics on screen, right? So I tell the kids, okay, here you go. Here's your character on screen, and the position of your character is determined by two coordinates: the x coordinate, which goes along the horizontal axis, and the y coordinate that goes along the vertical axis. Now, the bigger or smaller these values are, it'll look like your character's moving on the game. Now, when both are 0, then in this context, the position of our character will be at the top left of the window. And I'll never forget, one of the kids that I was teaching goes like, oh, hold on. Sorry, I hit the microphone. Hold on. That doesn't seem right. And the kid goes like, when we learned this we learned graphs, and that when y is 0, it should be at the bottom. Why is this framework? Why are you computer people doing it this way? And I had never stopped to think about why. And I remember being stumped, and I remember being tempted to just be like, come on, it's just the way it is. Right? I mean, we've all been there. But I took a step back and I said, you know what? You know what? I don't know. Let's find out. And so we did some searching, and we actually learned together what the solution was. I'm going to share with you because it's quite interesting. What you see here is an illustration of an old computer monitor, or CRT, which stands for cathode ray tube monitors. And we learned, me and the children, was that the way these old monitors would render an image on screen was by illuminating these cathode ray tubes very, very quickly, from top, one row at a time, top to bottom, and from left to right. So it just goes whoosh, 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 whoosh. And this is why it was more convenient for the programming frameworks to start from there, which we found fascinating. And I actually have an example of it running for you from a YouTube video that I've got linked here. It is incredible. So I've got a GIF coming up. So what you see here is the game Super Mario Brothers played, I believe, at 10,000 times slower, right? Than you would normally see. And you can kind of see there, it's going line by line from left to right. It's hauntingly beautiful. And again, taking these opportunities to go on a searching journey with your mentee is incredibly helpful, because you also get to show them the skill of looking stuff up. For example, here's a screenshot from DuckDuckGo, how to exit Vim. I've Googled that a couple times. I've searched that a couple times. By showing them how you go on this process, you also demystify a little bit this knowledge gap. One of my favorite questions that I was ever asked at a Rails Girls workshop, again, something I'd never wondered before. They go like, one of the people attending the workshop flagged me over. It's like, hey, Ramon, I got a question. Why is it called a div? Why is the HTML element called a div? And again, I guess because I had been in it for a while, in the game of software development for a while, I hadn't stopped to wonder why. And I didn't know. Turns out it's divider, by the way. We learned that together. And again, using guided questions to help these mentees get to their answers is something that's super valuable. And it gives you an opportunity, when you don't know something or when you're stuck on something, to show them how you, with your experience, solve that problem. One of my favorite experiences, I think was 2 years ago, was watching Wes Boss's React introduction guide, because in it, he left in his mistakes. And I loved this because I would find myself following along and being like, hold on, that looks like a typo. Is this going to break? And he just kept going, and it would indeed break. And instead of editing that out, as is probably tempting, I'd be tempted to edit out my mistakes. Instead of editing it out, he went, oh no, it's broken. Let's go and fix it. And he showed us how he fixed those problems. And he talked out loud as he did it. This is something that I really like about streaming as well. We no longer have that that ability to edit out our mistakes. And by showing how we solve those problems, I think we also have an opportunity to demystify what is mystical. Which is just fancy, me being silly and fancy, just being like to really take away some of the, to not let things just be magic. And so, and every now and then, when a topic comes up that I think, hey, this could be really interesting to go into, it's a good idea every now and then to check in and say, hey, how about we go into a deep dive of this concept? For example, I have in several Rails Girls workshops just taken an opportunity with my mentee and just say like, hey, let's learn how an HTTP request works. How does that client server relationship look like? I apologize. This drawing is, I'm working on it. I've been working on my drawing skills. But yeah, by taking that opportunity to show them and draw a diagram with them and show them, hey, this is how things work. You also have that opportunity to also show them resources and games. I love games that can help demystify these more complex subjects. For example, something I love is this game here called Regex Crossword, which is a lot of fun and helps you learn and get more comfortable with regular expressions. And there's a lot of these. I'm going to show you a couple. CSS Diner. Oh, I love CSS Diner so much. This is a game that helps folks learn and better understand how to work with complex CSS selectors. So, you select plates, select the fancy plate, select the apple that's on both plates, and so on. It's super fun. And there's a bunch of these. There's Flexbox Froggy to help you learn Flexbox, which is a CSS layouting tool. There's not just games, of course, there's books. I keep recommending Practical Object-Oriented Design by Sandy Metz. It is one of the best books that I've read on Rails. And I don't know where my copy is actually. I probably lent it to somebody. And by going on that, I think another thing that I want to touch upon with mentorship is that this is all relative. The fact that a mentor has more experience in an area than a mentee does not mean that mentor has to be an expert. And I'll explain what I mean in just a second. I'm going to tell a story about my sister, Pilar, who attended a Rails Girls workshop. And a few months after that workshop, she got called up. Hey, do you want, or maybe it was a few weeks. Sorry. She got called up and was asked, hey, do you want to be a coach, a mentor at one of these workshops? And Pilar said, but I just did this workshop a few months ago. And the organizer told her something that I really carry with me to this day. And that is that you have the best experience for being able to mentor because you have that fresh perspective of trying to learn and understand what is Rails as a concept nowadays, what it is like to learn web development at this point in time. And I think having that experience closer to that of newcomer can be extremely valuable. And conversely, can be applied at a higher seniority level. Just because I've been developing software for 10 years doesn't mean that I cannot have a mentor-mentee relationship where I'm the mentee and I learn from someone who's more experienced in something than I am. It doesn't necessarily have to be someone with more years of experience, but just more time and experience in a specific area. Say, in my case, graphics programming is something that I could stand to learn a lot more about. So I realize I'm going for a while. I'm almost done. I really want to touch upon, as fun as it is, as mentorship is, it is extremely important to bear in mind that as humans, we have energy limits and we need to be conscious of those. Because I have found over time that if I'm doing too much, if I take on too many mentees at a time, I will not be as effective. The quality of my mentorship will suffer. So it's important for me as a person and for you as a mentor to take care of yourself and to know and to be aware and respect those limits that are malleable over time. So so you might be wondering, where can I go to mentor folks? And here's a last couple tips I want to give. Find a local organization or event. There's a ton of them here in Vienna, for example. There's the Wien Coda Dojo. There's, I said, lots of there. There's lots of Rails Girls Workshop. There's Railsbridge, Rustbridge. I mentioned a couple of these. There's also a bunch of others. Go check them out. They're online. There's also some locally. One thing that I have been really enjoying doing over the internet is hosting open advice one-on-ones. That this was something recommended to me by my friend Jess, who at least when I started, I'm gonna say hi Jess. She's here. Yeah. She actually open sourced a bunch of tips and advice for starting your open advice one-on-ones, where you can just talk to folks and just hear them out. A lot of the time, folks just want to be listened to. Other ways you can do this is by tagging your open source issues. If you have an open source project, tag some issues if you have the time and, of course, the resources to do so, and say, hey, I would love to pair with you on this. I'm available for pairing with you on this issue. Lastly, it's also totally cool to to see if to check out if your workplace has an internal mentorship program, and if not, propose one. One thing that I've been doing for a long time that I also really enjoy is this is the term that I got from my friend Joe Nash. It's called a community of practice, which is something that I learned about from the book Building Successful Online Communities. So this is just a get together, kind of a meetup, kind of like we're doing now, where folks just get together and just learn stuff together on their computers, bring their own open source project, bring their homework, bring whatever they're working on, and just hang out and code together. We've been doing these online as well. It's been a lot of fun. That's another talk of mine that I happy to give some time. So we started our own. It's called Study Jams. It's a bit of a misnomer now because it's not a coding community in Vienna, because right now it's online, and it's incredibly fun. Another thing you can do is learn in public. Oh, there's this book. I'm going to recommend it now. It's called Working in Public, The Making and Maintenance of Open Source Software by Nadia Egbal. It is fantastic. And learning in public is something that's becoming quite popular nowadays, where you just either stream yourself or write up your thoughts as you go, learning stuff. I'm told that Jess might be streaming soon about herself doing the free code camp lessons. So that's definitely something worth doing and checking out. So to conclude, as much as I like that definition of mentorship from the beginning, I've come to think of mentorship not just as the sharing of knowledge, but sharing the joy of sharing knowledge. And I highly encourage you, if you can, if you want to give it a try. As I hope to have illuminated, it's regardless of skill level, regardless of levels of experience, because all these perspectives matter. And so does yours. So folks, here's the resources I promised. Check them out. I highly recommend the mentorship guide. It's open source. There's Jess's open advice one-on-ones, the games, the books, and other stuff. I just want to say thank you so much for joining me today. And yeah, if you want to get in touch, you can write to me. I'm at holasoymilk on Twitter. And yeah, have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thank you so much for a great talk, Ramon. That was really wonderful. So do we have any questions? Thanks for coming to chat, which is great.
Sorry.
So thank you very much.
I just realized my headphones were off. Thank you for having me.
Okay, great. So maybe I'll start off. I guess you mentioned also taking care of yourself, not having too many mentees. How do you balance? What do you choose as kind of too many? Do you kind of set a certain amount of time, say per month, for mentoring activities, or per year, or something like this?
Yeah, different folks will try different things. I know that some folks, for example, have a dedicated day of in a month or a week where they do that. So I, for example, try to do that. I'll sort of book. I'll sort of tell folks. I'll give them. I'll use something called Calendly, which helps folks coordinate appointments. So they can sort of pick a slot from your time, that's synced with your calendar, and then you can sort of come to a different time there, and just pick a day where you just do a bunch of those. Yeah, that's what works for me.
Right. Thank you. So I have a question in the chat from Jess. Can you talk about common concerns or fears that hold people back from trying mentorship?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, totally. I think from my experience, so for example, this in the story that from my sister Pilar wanting to go into it, I think this notion of imposter syndrome was really holding her back, which is something that held me back for a long time too, where it was just like, why would anybody want to know from me? What do I have to offer? I think I think it's quite common for us not to really realize how much we've learned, how much we can offer um, as mentors, um, as mentors. Sorry, I kind of lost my track. I'm reading the chat at the same time. My mistake. um, yeah, you know, I think a lot of folks will find themselves thinking like, am I good enough? Or either that, or trying to bite off more than they can chew in terms of taking on too many mentees at once, or as I said before, trying to talk about topics with a certain level of, with a certain thinking that sorry, with talking about topics that they might not know all that well, being scared of leaving the bad impressions. This is something that holds me back a lot as well, is having that fear of giving someone advice that might not be all that positive, instilling negative habits, discouraging somebody. I am very afraid of discouraging a mentee. And these are things that I think one just has to be aware of when working on a mentor-mentee relationship. I hope that answers your
Excellent.
question.
Thank you. Feel free also, we're not so many. So I guess there's one last question from Joshua. How do you find out whether you're actually empathetic? We work with things. How are we supposed to work with people? Could I be an empathy imposter?
Whew, that is a terrific question. Yeah, that I don't know. I don't know if I have an adequate answer for that. From my experience, I have in the past found myself thinking that I'm certainly, let's say, not empathic, or not empathetic. Sorry, I don't know what empathetic. Where I've found myself thinking I have empathy, but in certain situations been called out and thought, no, in fact, in this situation, you're not exhibiting empathy. And in those moments, I think what truly sets the bar is to take that moment, take that failure, recognize, admit it, in my experience, to take that failure and learn from it and say, wow, you know what? You're right. I was not exhibiting empathy at this time. I will do better in the future, and turn that into actionable items that you can then say, hey, this is how to exhibit that empathy moving forward. I hope that answers your question.